Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to what will be the third and final part of my thoughts on the Polaroid SLR690. For those that watched the first and second parts of the video, I did what is probably the internet's most in-depth deep dive into the inherent design flaws in the Polaroid 690 electronics. All of the electronics I have set off to the side, which I'll just get over here. So I have the original 690 ribbon cables, plus the currently broken 690 main shutter unit and PCB. And in the last video, we talked about how the main design flaw of these is two things. The first being the over-reliance on transistor arrays, and the baffling decision to provide constant power to such transistor relays, and the second thing being the very flimsy ribbon cables. So that means to repair a Polaroid 690, by default you have to start by replacing the entire ribbon cable, so this part here that goes from the body of the camera to the PCB that contains the electric eye, and then into the NEC microcontroller in the center of the main circuit board. So on a normal SX70, the brains of the camera are on this PCB. In the 690, this PCB basically does nothing except house the electric eye. And yeah, it's this little bad boy here, this NEC microcontroller, that does all the work. So the ribbon cable lands somewhere behind here. There's heaps of different points of solder on it. And yeah, it is very annoying to replace. It's not hard, it's just tedious. So to start off with repairing them, you have to replace the ribbon cable, because the ribbon cable can fail at any one of those different points of solder. Polaroid soldered these together with quite cheap tin solder, and it does oxidize and lose electrical connectivity over time. And then once you've confirmed that the ribbon cables are all good, should the camera still continue to have problems, it's a game of component whack-a-mole until you figure it out. And generally, the biggest culprit of causing failure is the MDCO3 transistor array, this little chip right here. So in my last two videos, I dived quite deep into explaining the issues behind the camera, namely being that between the flimsy ribbon cables and those constantly powered transistors, effectively what it means is if you leave a pack of film in the camera, even when the camera is collapsed, that PCB stays continuously powered. And that puts extra stress and strain on the chips, which is not a good thing, leading to premature death of the camera. And the funny thing is that when these die, because of the way the transistors work, you can get any number of symptoms just depending on where and how it's failed. So when I released those videos, I chose to use the title Complete Garbage in the thumbnail, which a few of you accused me of being quite clickbait tactics. I mean, I guess so, but in my mind, clickbait is usually when you have something in the thumbnail that is otherwise not particularly featured in the video. So for example, if I used my thumbnail as some bikini-clad woman, using sex to sell my videos, I would say, yeah, that's an example of clickbait. If I feature a thumbnail showing a gold-plated camera, and then I never show that camera in the video, yeah, I'd be more inclined to call that clickbait. What I think I was doing was providing an eye-catching title and just speaking the honest, brutal truth about these cameras, and it worked. A lot of the information got out there. It ruffled a few people's feathers. I'm assuming that most people that had something negative to say were owners of a Polaroid 690. I had a Polaroid former employee try and tell me that I was spreading misinformation, and then come back and leave a comment saying that he ultimately thought the 680 was a better camera anyway. So yeah, it was a real weird trip over the last week. I posted in Reddit, got a whole bunch of downvotes. But the moral of the story is the 690, comparative to a 680, just isn't as good electronically. But what I wanted to talk about is two things that you could do to prolong the lifespan of your 690 if you happen to be one of the unfortunate souls that owns one. The first is that when you go out shooting, make sure you use up all 8 photos and take the pack out of the camera. That powers down the PCB, and that's going to prolong the life. The second thing that you could do is actually use, this is a prototype of the one that Retrospect sell. I was given this by the inventor. You could use an I-type battery back and actually have a technician like completely remove the internal battery terminal so that you could never power it off 600, and you could choose to power this off like AAA batteries instead. And actually have a switch that you could physically cut power to everything inside the camera. Doing so would not only allow you to use I-type film, because these are natively 600 converted, they take 600 film, but doing so, like especially hardwiring one of these battery backs in, would be a way that you could know for sure by turning off the switch or physically removing the batteries that you would be able to power down the camera. So there are solutions for the 690, but ultimately they have that design flaw. And as far as I know, I'm the first technician to really talk about it publicly, but also just the first YouTube video in general to have mentioned this design flaw and what is otherwise a really serious problem. Now, before I continue completing the camera, I just wanted to go into a few little points that basically got raised. I had one person in the comments section that was sort of baffled by the idea that my client would want to get rid of the built-in flash on the 690, and you know, that by going with a sonar shutter, they were losing that functionality, and they couldn't understand why anyone would want to do that. The truth of the matter is, that's up to the client. It doesn't matter what you think. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and that's fine. If you want a built-in flash because you see that as being the most important part of the camera, and all you do is take flash photos, even up to 10 inches close, and you value the flash, well then a 680 or a 690 is the camera for you. But truth of the matter, if you don't use a lot of flash, and all you really care about with the 680 and the 690 is the fact that it takes 600 film, well, any SX70 can be upgraded to take 600 film. The shutter that I'm going to install in this camera has the new SX70R PCB in there. So not only will this take 600 film, but it'll provide Bluetooth functionality for manual control of the shutter speeds. It'll provide a built-in self-timer, built-in time and bulb mode. But most importantly, you can still use flash. If you get yourself a Mint flash bar and insert it into the top, this now is like 90% of what a Polaroid 680 does, with the added advantage that the Mint flash bar has 2 power settings. It can use 600, or you can go all the way to full power and shoot SX70 film, which you cannot do in a 680. A Polaroid 680, the flash is not powerful enough to shoot with SX70 film. And so, as a result, the camera that my client is going to get is arguably far more versatile than the 690 was ever going to be. The 690, being different electronics, isn't compatible with the SX70R PCB, so it's not like we could have just swapped the shutter. Because it's a completely different design, this PCB just straight up doesn't work. But we now have a camera that has a flash socket, which we could then, my client could then purchase the optional dedicated dongle, which then gives access to studio strobes, plus all of those manual features just at the touch of a little scroll wheel. Or my client, because he's gone for a sonar, could even choose to power the camera externally using one of Dennis's power bars, which basically, if you don't know what the power bar is, have a Google of Chromatic Parts, look at his Instagram. He makes these for sonar cameras, and basically he also makes them for standard cameras as well, but that does need a modification. But with the Power Bar S, any 600 film converted or 600 film capable SX70 sonar, you can just click that straight into the top of the shutter housing and effectively get 6-volt power to run the camera. So it's super handy to have. So by foregoing the flash, we've actually gained a whole bunch of functionality. As I said, we've got the ability to use a mint flash for SX70 and 600 film, the ability to use original Polaroid flashes, the ability to use PC sync with an adapter, the ability to use the dedicated dongle and have somewhere to rest it, or the ability to power the camera from 6 volts directly through the flash terminal. So there's so much extra functionality that my client's getting by deleting that part. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about, because this does come up every now and again, people debating 680 versus a modified SX70 sonar. The thing is that if the flash ever died on this, like let's say the mint flash bar just stopped working, well, you unclip it, you contact Mint and you say, oi, my flash bar stopped, and you either buy a new one, or if it's under warranty, they'll send you a new one. Simple. If the flash dies in a 690, you are left finding 690 flash spare parts. Similarly, if it dies in a 680, you've either got to start replacing components or find an entire spare unit, depending on which part has blown. So there's a huge advantage to going simpler. It's one less thing to go wrong. Anyway, all of that aside, I now need to actually put this thing together and test it because I haven't finished assembling the camera. The one thing I did have to do to the body, I had to fix the connections on the rear hinge pin. So the power that was going to the camera was very intermittent, and it turned out that was because one of the copper traces had just started to lose connectivity. It had been bent one too many times. And so what I did is actually wired solenoid wire directly. I bypassed where the kink in the ribbon cable goes, and I did it for both positive and negative just to be doubly sure that it was always going to work. So that just built in that extra layer of redundancy for the power in case it ever did properly fail. But yeah, it is now time to mount the new shutter. I am just going to give it a bit of a test fit, make sure it's all gonna go in nicely. I'm just gonna mount it with 2 screws to start off with. And I will say that I have a few spare sonar units at the moment. I have not tested this one just yet. It did work when I took it off the camera that it was originally sitting on. This shutter came off an SX70 sonar that had completely destroyed top body panels. And it did work when it was on that camera, so I assume it's going to work now. But I do need to test and calibrate the new PCB. So first thing I'm going to do is just solder it to the side of the camera. Now, as I've pointed out before, the benefit with converting the bottom body ribbons to a standard SX70 sonar design is we can now put any shutter on this camera that we want. We could use the shutter from a Model 1, a Model 2, a Model 3, an Alpha, a Sonar, or a 680, because all of those models, with the exception of very early production run SX70 Model 1s, all of those models use the same basic shutter design. The same 7 pins of connection. They're all very, very modular, which is why the SX70R is based on this particular design. And again, that just gives us that extra layer of repairability and future-proofing. We'll be able to use really any parts to bring this back from the dead. My client could dip the entire shutter in a swimming pool, absolutely ruin it, let it rust, and we'd still be able to come swap it with another one that's easy to find because we literally got any model SX70 to choose from. And yeah, we can get it up and running again, which I think is really, really neat. So I'm just going to make sure we clean the side body ribbon. And what I really have to do, you guys might remember in the last video, I've got to ensure that all of the switch assemblies, so in the RAM switch here that is in the side of the gear train, I've got to make sure that they're hitting both of the leaf switches in there in the correct order at the correct time to ensure accurate ejection and that kind of thing. And obviously we've got to make sure the shutter works. Not only do I have to calibrate the solenoid for the pneumatics to make sure that all the manual settings work, I've also got to make sure that the autofocus is set correctly, because I haven't been able to mount this to a viewfinder yet. I haven't had the chance to figure out whether it's accurate or not. But I'm just going to grab an empty pack of film, and we are looking good. I'm just going to make sure the autofocus is working, because it doesn't appear to want to play ball at the moment. Alright, well, I'll have to figure out why that's not working. So I'm going to cut there and come right back. Alright, we're back. Turns out the motor that was in there just totally straight up seized. So won't be needing that one anymore. But there we go. The finished camera in all of its glory. The only thing that I have left to do at the moment is reskin this thing. So you guys will probably see like a little gallery or something like that at the end of the video, just demonstrating the finished result. Put the sonar housing on, new motor, and everything works as it should. Overall, the camera is in really, really good condition. All that I have to do now is make sure that the SX70R PCB is completely calibrated. And yeah, flash sync, everything on this works. It is a super, super awesome condition camera. I ended up also upgrading the motor inside to a Mabuchi, the same as the SLR690 uses. So for all intents and purposes, you know, a good 80 or 90% of these of the parts that make up this camera are SLR690. On the top, where I de-skinned it in between the cuts of the video, you can actually see how, as I've pulled away the skin, it's actually taken the top shiny layer of plastic off. And this is something that's very, very typical of 690 body panels. You'll see all kinds of little scuffs and marks, but overall, the body feels quite premium. As I described in the last video, it's sort of like this combination of feeling cheap, but also feeling very well put together at the same time, because just the way that the camera actually opens up and the way that it actually feels when you're opening the panels, it's like the Japanese had a much better idea of how panel fit should be on an SX70 SLR camera, but they didn't quite get the materials as premium as they could have. So anyway, as always, if you would like your camera refurbished by myself, please feel free to get in touch. I've had a whole bunch of you do that over the last few weeks, to the point where I'm incredibly busy. And at the moment, usually my turnaround time is around a week or so. I get it done usually within a day or two of receiving the camera. At the moment, that turnaround time is a week, because I had like a whole bunch of people send stuff all at once. And a few cameras within that bunch ended up being really problematic, requiring a lot of time, energy, and resources to fix. I got there in the end, but yeah, it was quite the ordeal. So anyway, if you like what I do, feel free to donate using the Ko-fi link below. Always appreciated if you buy me a beer or two. I'm off to recalibrate this thing. We'll reskin it in some new leather, and hopefully I'll show you guys the finished results. Well, there we have it. Reskinned in Aki Asahi Black Crinkle Emboss. We have the world's second, what I will dub the SX690. This one being the first that I've ever made with the SX70R PCB. It works absolutely flawlessly, perfect exposures, this one taken on the automatic setting, and should provide lots of fun snaps for years to come. The benefit being, if any single part on it breaks, it's going to be way easier to source parts. It can be used with a flash, which is both 600 and SX70 film compatible. And of course, when used with something like a chromatic parts power bar, can use I-type film by powering the camera directly through the flash socket, which is possible on sonar cameras because on the flash socket at the rear is an extra set of terminals. Why Polaroid ever decided to include positive and negative on those terminals, I'm not entirely sure. I can only imagine it was for a feature that was forgotten about, or a product was designed to be intended to used with and just never eventuated. But yeah, I might hopefully try and leave you guys with a bit of a gallery of photos at the end of this video. I hope you found this last part of the series interesting, and I'm going to get this shipped off to the client. As always, if you like what I do, feel free to give me a donation using the links below, or simply just send something my way to be refurbished. As always, I couldn't do my channel with all the support that you guys give me. As of the time of me posting this, I'm slowly creeping towards 1,000 subscribers, which is about 900 more than I ever thought that I would get. So thank you very much to anyone that's been watching since day one. And until the next video, happy shooting.